How many times do we open up our phone and hop on TikTok, Instagram, whatever, and we see that someone else, one of our faves, is being canceled? Too many. It's starting to feel overwhelming. I don't know if it's due to the hyper surveillance we have of people, especially celebrities, or just the access to information is just, more available to people. But it seems like left and right, people are getting canceled, and we're finding out more and more about artists that we honestly wish we may have never known because now we can't really enjoy the art the same way. So it begs the question, can we separate the art from the artist? Who deserves to be an artist? Who deserves to consume art? That's what we're going to be talking about today. So welcome back to another episode of the Realitea Podcast. It's Layla, your co-host, so stay tuned on this ride. So I felt as though a perfect example to dive into this would be this episode of High Fidelity that I love. It's like literally my favorite episode. I don't know, maybe this is why. But in season 1, episode 5, Okay, let me just backtrack. If you haven't seen High Fidelity, it's about Zoe Kravitz's character, Rob, and her adventures through the big city while owning a record store in Brooklyn. And one day she gets a call. In this episode, she gets a call from a wealthy woman in the Upper East Side who wants to sell her a record collection. So she goes to check it out, and she realizes that, things aren't as black and white as they seem. So initially, we're introduced to the woman who will sell the records. Her name is Noreen, and she's like a bit of an eccentric, quirky artist herself. She has these sculptures and these kind of surrealist works of art decorating her entire home that she's done herself. And she's kind of like an alchemist in a way. She takes her painful memories and turns them into works of art. So that in and of itself is a type of artist that we see, someone who takes that pain and makes something productive of it, or something to kind of almost flip the narrative of the memory. And it's all through perception. So she feels as though making art is something that could save her and something that helps her get through hard tragedies within her life. So when we're presented with the record collection, Noreen explains that it is in fact her husband's record collection, and he's been collecting these records for God knows how long. She feels as though the records are the only thing he really loves, and she wants to get rid of them because she finds out that he has recently cheated on her, and she's filing a divorce. And she wants him to come home and get the last of his things and see, instead of his record collection, a perfectly crisp $20 bill. Now, Rob initially has some conflicting feelings about this because music has saved her life, and she's going through these records and she's seeing the sheer value in them, not even just for the records themselves, but also like the time and intention that it takes to collect something like this, and to the extent there were so many. And she was like, lady, you want these for just $20? Like, I get your husband's like a shitty person, but it's $20. Like, this is kind of insane. And so, feeling very conflicted, Rob takes it upon herself to meet her husband herself, in disguise, in disguise, of course. So she goes down to this bar that his wife knew he'd be at, and she has a run-in with him alongside her friend Clyde, I think his name is, and she comes to realize, he is in fact like totally just an asshole, misogynist, all of the above. But she's feeling conflicted because there's a scene where he's stating, he's expressing that he's been in this bar for so many years in and out because it holds like such a pivotal community for artists and music. And he expressed that he was retelling a story of how he met Mick Jagger in the restaurant, another problematic artist. And he said, I just want to shake the man's hand, but when I went up to him, all that came out was, your music saved my life. And in that moment, you can see how Rob could relate to him, not only because of their shared love of music, and even, despite the fact that he was an asshole, but also just because she saw a bit of herself in him in the sense that she is flawed. She's not a perfect person. So, what gives her the right to decide who can enjoy art? And I think that is really the pinnacle of the question here of separating the art from the artist, because who is deciding who gets to separate the art from the artist? Who decides what makes an artist, and who decides who gets to enjoy that art? When we think about it, artists are people. So at the end of the day, nobody is perfect. People are not perfect. So we're making imperfect people. Imperfect people are creating things, and we feel a sense of connection to their art because it's compelling. But with that can sometimes come the glamification and worshiping of the artist who is responsible for making the art. But to me, I think that just kind of removes our place in the art as the consumer, as the fan, as the observer, because without our presence to observe the art wouldn't be what we are experiencing it to be. It takes a community to make art and to receive art. Without the message received, is there really a message? So, artists rely on feedback from audiences to not only be successful, but to also garner community and connection and, have thought-provoking conversation. So that is in no means an excuse for problematic artists. The list goes on, and what you choose to consume and what you choose to support is completely up to you. It's just sometimes I think we make things so black and white when there's a lot of nuance to, life, and, art imitates life. So where does it leave us to decide who gets to make art? And I think a lot of the time why we even get so frustrated with artists is because of this parasocial relationship that we develop with artists and things of that nature. Because people do shitty things all the time, but I think because we have this idea, and there's so many tropes involved with art, that artists seem to get it the worst. And I don't know if that's because they're the face or what, but they seem to get it the worst because they attract this mass following and they become embedded in culture. So when they are not the person that we perceive them to be or wanted them to be, it gets really out of hand, and there's a lot of emotion behind that. And I think it also has to do with the relationship that you have with that artist, whether or not their art has saved your life or you just feel strongly about it. But also because when we look at artists, we see things in people as if we couldn't do it ourselves. And, everyone has gifts and unique talents, but that person's not doing anything that you couldn't do. It's just about opportunity. It's about time. It's about, circumstance that makes someone an artist, that makes someone have the ability to reach wider audiences. There is a certain privilege and time that's allotted to even make something like that happen, something that a lot of people don't always have the opportunity to do. And I think that's really more of a systemic problem with art and humanities being treated as more of an elective rather than a priority, whether that be in school or in homes. I grew up in a home where I was very passionate about things like poetry and music and movies, but that stuff wasn't really encouraged because it wasn't seen as promising, long term, like for a career. It's like you have to be realistic. You can't, focus so much on things that you enjoy. That can just be a hobby. So I think that when we see people have these opportunities and have this reach, we also get disappointed because it's like, maybe that's not what we would have done in their shoes, or it seems as though like an opportunity is wasted. And a lot of people who are resentful or bitter are people who have creative energy that has just been wasted, or it hasn't been tapped into, it's been sat on. And seeing other people in those spaces can be triggering for people sometimes because it's like, I could have done this, or maybe I should be doing this, and sometimes the energy is misdirected as well. So I think that is part of the reason as to why there's such a drive towards when artists make mistakes, or when they are, not the people we think them to be, because not only did we relate to them in the sense of their music and their art, but we also related to them in the sense of this is something that I'm passionate about as well, something that I like to do, relating to them and being an artist in a creative space. So I think when we talk about separating the art from the artist is not just the artist. It's not just the face, we are part of the relationship with the artist, because without, fans and, that type of culture, there wouldn't really be an artist who's being worshipped and praised. So it kind of removes the consumer's power in the equation altogether, which is something that I think we need to consider. We talk about all the time how we make the wrong people famous, and be that as it may, I think it's really important to not only be intentional about the things that you consume, but also just remember that when it comes to separating the art from the artist, there are still the people who listen to the artist. There's still the people who support that artist. So it's less about the artist and more about the community. Like even in the episode, whether or not Rob accepted the records, Noreen was going to find somebody else to buy those records. She said, I need them out of my house tonight. Someone else is going to have them. So it's like, is it going to be you or is it going to be somebody else? Because there's always going to be, somebody who's gonna, once a fandom is curated and there are people who develop a really strong attachment to artists, that's really hard to get rid of. Like it's kind of makes the artist untouchable in a way. Like even in another episode, they were debating whether or not they should sell a Michael Jackson record because of his, alleged controversies. But then it begs the question, why have the record in the first place, even with people, like I remember when that whole Ariana Grande situation was going on and people were upset with her for having an affair with her co-star, people were definitely mentioning the fact that it was a pattern and this is just what she does, and she's been weird on this type of behavior. So it begs, like, why are you making it a problem now? Why is it such an explosive problem now? Like, why? I feel like people pick and choose when artists are problematic because it forces them to look at the artist as a human being. And, would you maybe like that human being if they weren't this artist? I don't know. We have to think about, is it really about the artist or is it about self-preservation? Is it really because what the artist did is wrong? Is that really what you have a problem with? Or is it about the fact that now it nullifies your experience with the art itself because now you feel guilty for enjoying it because of the artist attached to it? So we have to really analyze, is this more about the act of wrongdoing or is it about how it affects my relationship and my experience with something that I enjoy? And the thing about, art and artistry is that it has always been a collaborative process. It's rarely just a one individual type of thing. Even if it is one person responsible for art, they're getting inspiration from somewhere, and we tend to, I don't know if it's like a human nature to want to worship things or praise things, but we give a lot of attention to the face rather than really thinking about all the complexities and nuance that goes into making pieces of art. Like, for example, listening to music. You're focused on the big name that's attached to it, but you're not thinking about the composer or the producer or the songwriter or the curator, who also is just as important to the song as the big artist is. So when we're separating the art from the artist, should those people have to suffer because of the injustices done by the bigger, more known person attached to it? Like, should their work and effort be dismissed because of the wrongdoings of someone else? And it's something to consider. And a lot of people will maybe make the argument of, well, why would they work with them in the first place? The thing is, I don't really know much about the music industry, but I do know about competition in career and opportunities. And the music industry, Hollywood, are some of the biggest highest competitive rates you'll probably ever be in. You get like one shot, and something like that could pivot your career entirely in the trajectory of your life. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to take that opportunity. Like if you were in their shoes, you'd probably take that opportunity. And you can't always help who it is that you work with, because you're trying to make a name for yourself, and bills got to get paid. So I think with that idea of dehumanizing artists, we kind of separate that level of empathy that should be shared with them as well. Whether you think they are deserving of it or not, it depends, who gets to decide. And taking that back to the episode, in the end, even after experiencing it firsthand herself of Tim's personality, Rob decides that she cannot accept the records. She cannot just leave $20 to this man's name, because she feels as though it's not her place to decide who deserves what and what somebody deserves because of their wrongdoings. She says that, art is for everybody. Everybody should be able to experience it, And I think in that moment, you can see how the empathy transcended the need for judgment and the need for personal gain, which is something that we don't really see that often. Even in Noreen, an artist herself, I doubt she's really thinking about it from a place of her betrayal and her hurt. For her, she's made it to being part of her portfolio. This is part of her lineup, part of her artwork. She plans on making this the greatest piece of art yet. And with that is more of the satisfaction, rather than her getting justice for her marriage and her time with this person. It's becomes more of a personal vendetta for her to, again, do what she does best of transforming her memories into works of art, which in itself is a sense of detachment from that human being and from those experiences and those memories, because it is what it does. It's about what it does for you, what it did for her as an artist, but maybe not as her as Noreen. If that makes sense. I hope that made sense. But to take it back to the community aspect and the idea of fan culture, I was in my research, I came across a video by Not Even Emily, and her video on separating the art from the artist, where she mentioned something really important about like fandom culture and stand-up culture, of this kind of like rat race that you enter into unbeknownst to you, when you decide that you like an artist. You step into this world of their fan base and this competitive nature between them as well, of who likes the artist more, and are you a real fan, you're a fake fan, that whole verbiage. That in itself also further puts the artist on a pedestal and just further propels their narrative. And it's kind of like you're doing the work for them. You don't really have to, they don't really have to do that much promoting, but people will follow them and their work, and just because they like that person. I think we're all guilty of it. I have a few artists that I'll sit there and watch something that they're in or listen to their song just to give it a chance, just because I like them as an artist. It doesn't mean I always like it, but I'll give it a chance and see. But there are people who will literally sit there and act like their favorite artist has no bad music, no bad work. I've never been one of those people myself. I can always admit when I don't like something, at least I'm not going to say it's bad, but I didn't particularly care for it. But there are like those diehard fans, and they're like, no, you're a fake fan if you're not listening to every single part of the album. If you did you hear the story? And you're just there like, I heard it, yeah. I just don't know if that was, their best, But, can't say that in front of the wrong fandoms. Like, seriously, like, sometimes on the internet, I really have to be watching myself with, what I say and which fandom I'm entering, because I'm not trying to be attacked, and I don't want, people showing up at my front door through my IP address. So just let it go. But just even that in itself, this blind allegiance to these artists, that you can't, it's like they're not welcome to critique, even though, everybody should be. So it's a matter of worship and who are we worshiping, because we can discuss who deserves to be heard. And honestly, I think there's a kind of strength in admitting that an artist isn't, perfect, and that they do have bad work, or that they do carry some type of, controversy, because part of art is a language, it's something that transcends time, generations. People are going to love artists from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different times. And I think part of making real art and being authentic with your art is that it holds all of that. And I feel like consumers should be allowed to know who they're listening to and who they're supporting, so that way they can have an informed opinion about them, and what they do with that information is now up to them. But it shouldn't be like these rose colored glasses over artists. I think they need to be authentic with who they are, instead of trying to put up face. And maybe that's media training and everything, go ahead. But when there's this idea and persona of artists, and that people are led to believe and are supposed to be in love with and follow and cherish forever, it just creates a narrative that they are untouchable, and that they are not allowed to be, not even just not allowed to be problematic, but also not being called out for it. So there's a level of accountability and responsibility that's just escaping people. And when you do try to call it out, people don't usually like to hear what you have to say, because it reflects, their own shortcomings, and things that they not only to occur, but it makes them uncomfortable, because it's like, damn, I was supporting this artist, and is this really what I want to support? If only it were that easy, that we could be listening to people and admiring art from a lens of without that person's name attached. But it's just not that black and white. So I think it really is up to the individual, because that relatability is usually what draws people in to artists. They feel that connection to their art, and you look into the artist and you start to learn about them, and maybe there's things you can relate to them with, or that you see yourself in. And so the wave of disappointment that comes when you find out they've been in a slew of scandals is just, it can be pretty heartbreaking. But at least now you'll have an informed opinion, and I feel like that makes the art more raw and more real, because now you can see the artist for who they are and not for who they are trying to sell you. Yeah. And I think it's important, because sometimes people will use their art as a means of masquerading and, being removed from accountability and scrutiny, when it is deserved sometimes. So when you're forcing artists to see themselves and not, I can't really imagine what that's like to be like a really big artist to the point where you're not really sure of who you are. But I think that can lead to a road of recovery, because it takes, acknowledgement first. Like, I know Kendrick Lamar has talked about this in some of his music, about how when he became Kendrick Lamar, he kind of forgot, who he actually was, and, his life back at home. And when he would go home, it was just a reflection of everything that he had chosen to ignore, and, for the sake of being Kendrick Lamar. And that kind of, identity crisis did catch up with him. And, he had to pivot and realize, is this who I'm going to be? Is this who I'm going to allow myself to become? What I'm going to allow my art to become? Is it going to continue to be something for me, or is it going to be something for other people? So I think just remembering that artists, are first and foremost human beings at the end of the day, apt to making mistakes, is crucial and vital. Sometimes, I can be up to viewers to, hold up that mirror and remind them, like, hey, this is not okay, this is not acceptable. But whenever you're worshiping artists, it kind of gives them this immunity. So not only do they not have to face you, to hell with the consumers, but they definitely don't have to face themselves, and that's the much bigger problem. And that's when things become repeated offenses, and things are swept under the rug, and it's a whole other can of worms. Whole other can of worms. So yeah, and I think oftentimes we do hold on to these attachments with artists because they do remind us of a piece of ourselves, or certain things we see in them we want for ourselves. So it's kind of hard to distance yourself from them in that regard to the medium holding you all together, which is their art. And sometimes that art may have saved your life, or it may have brought you to a place of discovery for yourself. Who knows what that does for you. Art, again, it's a language. It's something that brings community and commitment to people, and it brings life to people, it brings joy, it provokes emotion. It's supposed to. It's really up to you and your moral compass to decide whether or not you want to continue to support somebody regardless, or if you feel that you can't. Again, it's up to you. I think the problem really is with the internet and just this one-minded society kind of thing. We have this idea that we have to all be on one accord about how we view artists and Hollywood and all of these things, but we're all looking at it from the outside. We don't actually know any of these people. So again, I just think it's up to the individual with who you want to support and why. But just just make sure that you're acknowledging whatever faults that those people are under, because at the end of the day, they are just people and they don't have anything over you. They're not more special than who you are. They're just somebody who had the audacity to try, and maybe more of the opportunity to try, and put themselves out there. Nothing that you couldn't do yourself. So yeah, I think that's where I'm going to leave it. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. It was so fun to research and stuff. So let me read you guys a tea quote of the day. Bring me the sunset in a cup. D. Emily Dickinson. Wasn't she problematic? I don't know. Let me know. But anyways, I hope you guys, enjoyed this episode. It was so fun to make. And just remember, your moral compass is your moral compass, and what you decide to promote and listen to, just be intentional about what you give your attention to and who deserves it. Because if they would talk about deserve, we need to talk about your attention, because who deserves that? Anyways, love you guys. See you next time. Bye.